my name's Faye Cahill. Today we're going to show you how to get a nice perfect shape on your ganache cakes. Okay, so I've got the 8-inch cake board in position on the 8-inch mark. I'm just lifting it up. It has a hole drilled on the underside to make a mark on the cake board. This is for finding the centre of a round board when you need to structure a tiered cake. We're securing our cake board down to the working board. We're doing that with white chocolate ganache to avoid marks of dark chocolate on the icing and when you stack the cake. I'm using a really thick and solid scraping tool here. This is going to allow us to cut through the dark chocolate ganache as it's currently a very firm consistency. We're then going to microwave it down until it's softer so we can work with it. So that's been in the microwave for a minute and we're giving it a bit of a stir. We want to soften it, but it should still have a bit of consistency so we can build up the height of the cake and not have it run out the sides when we layer the cake. So we refrigerate our cakes overnight. This sets the crumb and firms them up a little bit. So I'm just going to trim off the top surface of the cake. The technique here is to hold the knife as level as you can and rotating the cake as you go. You can use this technique also to split the cake into 3. If you have a cake leveler, set it to 1 inch, turn the cake over and use your leveler to cut through the cake layers. Okay, so what we have is 4 layers of cake, 3 from one cake, and we've taken a 4th layer from the second cake. This is going to give us a finished height of 5 inches, which is one of the most common tier heights that we use in our studio. We're going to use the non-slip mat on the turntable to keep the prepared board in place. We'll start by spreading the soft ganache onto the cake board. Usually the first layer of cake is what used to be on top of the cake. It's usually the layer that isn't as flat as the others, so it's best to use that as the base foundation. So start with your sugar syrup and generously cover the layers. Now we're creating our first layer. Spread the ganache while you're rotating the turntable, trying to keep it nice and level. Repeat this for all 4 layers, just checking every time you add a layer that it's sitting nice and level. Work your palette knife from side to side, gently spreading out the ganache. Don't make contact with the crumb or you can drag it back into your ganache, making a bit of a mess. Also, if your ganache starts to firm up too much, it will pull up the crumb from the cake layer below. Smooth the ganache with your palette knife from side to side. During the process, I rotate the cake using a ruler to check the height and make sure it's all level. I'm just wiping a bit of excess ganache off the cake sides, making it a bit easier to trim. So what you can see if you hold a right angle up to the cake, there's not a very large gap between the right angle and the cake. So we want to create a bigger gap that's about 1 centimetre thick, and we'll fill that with ganache. Just trying to keep the cuts as even as possible, work from top to bottom around the cake. If your cake is baked a little bit smaller and it already fits within the cake board, you may not need to do this step. Check the gap to see if you've got the width that you need, which we do. After that, we'll cover the top of the cake with ganache using the same technique as before, side to side movements with your palette knife. And then apply a crumb coat to the sides, starting from the top and then edging side to side when you get to the bottom. So now we're adding a second layer to the top. We'll start by doing that with a palette knife, and then we'll switch to our long scraper, and then using a circular motion we're going to scrape around the cake, keeping it nice and flowing. As you're scraping and spinning the cake, you'll see the ganache firming up. If it's not firming up, you may need to put it in the fridge to cool it down a little bit. We're building the ganache out a little bit over the sides to create a bit of a hat. One of the things that we see with our students when they first do this technique is that they try to use the scraper in the wrong position. Try to avoid scraping forwards and backwards. What we're doing is a round motion, spinning the cake. That way you have a better chance of not getting slopes on the edges. Check your cake levels once again after you've scraped the top of the cake. If you have any high points, then you need to scrape them back, and if you have any low points, you need to build them up a little bit, and you're doing that with a runny ganache. We're using the heated up ganache to get the final smooth finish. Keep working at it until the top surface is firm. Get your other masonite board and dampen the silver side with water. Now we'll place it on top of our cake, shiny side down. Then we want to check the position of the cake with the right angle. Both the top and the bottom of the board should line up. Go around the cake a couple of times and give it a bit of a nudge if it's not perpendicular. Then the next thing is to take off that excess ganache where you created the hat. Use the scraper to take off the excess ganache that's gone outside the board. Now fill in the sides. Completely fill out the whole area from the top board to the bottom. You can use the plastic scraper to apply more ganache at once. So we have some holes that we need to fill up. What we're doing is adding in some ganache with the palette knife and scraping off any excess. Just repeat that for all of the holes on your cake. Always make sure that the edges of the cake boards are visible. It becomes harder to scrape off when the ganache sets. Using a straight edge, check the sides of the cake to see if there's any light coming through. So this is our final runny coat of ganache. When it's freshly put on, you can see it's really shiny, and we're going to keep spinning that and working with it until it goes a bit dull. Now heat up your big palette knife in boiling water and give the cake one final smooth around. So now we heat up the paring knife and use this to take off the lid. Insert the knife under the lid using a bit of upward pressure, run it around the entire top surface of the cake and it should pop off. Warming your palette knife again, smooth the top of your cake and run around the edge softly with your finger. So now we have a perfectly shaped cake and we've laid the foundation for covering in fondant to get those perfect sharp edges.